Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. I'm David Hopper, Awesome Bureau Chief of 360degreesound.com, where we bring you music from all angles. For this installment of our long-running author talk series, I'm joined by Chris Dalla Riva, author of the new book, Uncharted Territory: What Numbers Tell Us About the Biggest Hit Songs and Ourselves. In addition to being an author, Chris works on data analytics and personalization at AudioMac. He's also a musician himself, writing and recording his own music. His writing has been featured in numerous publications, including The Economist and Business Insider. Chris, thanks so much for joining 360degreesound.com.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat about this stuff.
Yes, yeah, it's a fascinating book as someone who loves popular music and music history and the charts. I really enjoyed it, and I think anyone who's into those things would enjoy it. So yeah, the Billboard Hot 100 is the premier, pop chart for music. Started in 1958. You decided to listen to every number one song on the Hot 100, starting from 1958 to today. I wonder if you tell us a little bit about that experience and how it led to you writing this book.
Yeah, I started doing that on a lark. I was just looking for sort of an outlet at the end of the day, a musical outlet at the end of my day, something to do to wind down. And as you mentioned, I've always played in bands. I still write songs, release them, still get out and gig from time to time. And I thought maybe if I listen to every number one hit, my skills as a songwriter would improve. You could go listen to my discography to determine if you think that's the case. But yeah, I just decided I was going to give this a go. And I started with Ricky Nelson's Poor Little Fool, which is the first song to ever get to number one on the Hot 100, I believe on August 4th, 1958. And I would just listen to one song every day. I probably got like 20, 30, I don't know, actually probably closer to 50 songs in. I started noticing some trends and I felt compelled to try to write something. And slowly over time, as I would listen, track information about these songs, and notice more trends, I would just write when I felt compelled to write. And it became a book, even though there was no goal at the beginning to write a book. So I'm happy that I finally found someone to publish it and that it's coming out because it was a very, very long journey. I think I listened to the first number one in either 2017 or 2018. I actually don't remember the exact date, but it was a long, long journey.
Yeah, that's a lot of songs. About how many songs is that on the Hot
We're
100 that have went to number one?
Yeah, we're closing in, I believe, on 1,200 if they haven't already crossed that threshold already. So
Wow.
my book, I obviously had to stop listening at some point to
Yeah,
put the book
yeah,
at.
yeah.
So I go through the beginning of 2025, and that was like 1,177 or something, something like that. So
Yeah, yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah, so I'll start with the chapters are divided by eras, I guess, 5 or 6 year span. So you're starting the book like 58 to early 60s, and that a lot's been written about this period. How it really, as you write, is underrated, and I agree. I've been doing a one hit wonder series for 360, and I'll dig into, like, I've done like 60, 61, 62, and yeah, there's a lot of good, like, doo-wop, a lot of surf music as you write in your book, kind of fun instrumentals, even some jazzy songs. So it's a wild variety, as you also say in your book. But yeah, it doesn't really get the credit because it's the period before the Beatles, and also like after the day the music died, when Buddy Holly and them died, and Chuck Berry went to prison and things like
yeah.
that. So yeah, so yes, I was wondering, was that, I guess, one of your surprises when you were researching and listening, that that period is not so bad?
Yeah, there were a couple times. I felt like actually in every era, and as I say in the book, these eras are just not arbitrarily defined by me, but whenever I felt like I had enough material to write about, I would stop and start writing. But yes, you're correct. They're roughly 5 or 6 years. And I was fascinated by the music, that pre-British invasion music. I think of it as like the post-Elvis, pre-Brittles, even though Elvis was still releasing music, like post-Elvis's first peak. and pre the Beatles coming to America. There's popular music is sort of at a crossroads there, and you highlighted a lot of the interesting stuff. You sort of see more folksy numbers are on the rise. Rock and roll is still popular. Surf rock is around. There's still this instrumental part of the genre. There's the remnants of the big band era that are still there. And it creates this fascinating mishmash of sounds that I think are overshadowed by the fact that, I mean, I'm not going to dispute that the end of the 60s was fantastic. And you not only have the British invasion going in full force, but you have the Beach Boys working. You got Phil Spector, you got Motown firing on all cylinders. So it's easy for the beginning of that decade to get overshadowed by the second half, but there is still a lot of fascinating stuff that was going on at the beginning.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things you write about in the book that was interesting, and this is more of like a overarching trend or evolution, but you talk about how music evolved from like a service to a product and back to
Mm.
a service and kind of changed over the years. I wanted to tell us if you go give a little brief explanation of what you meant by that.
Yeah, so if you've been born in the last 100 years, you've probably experienced music as a product. And by a product, I mean you can buy a piece of music. I mean, still to this day, you can go out to a record store and buy a piece of vinyl. If you're a little bit older, CDs may have been the way that you listened for a long time. And I can see behind you, there's a gazillion CDs. So you're very familiar with
Yeah.
music as the product. And there's been so many music products over the years, some of which we've forgotten, some of which we've left in the past. The cassette is another one that comes to mind. And the music business, they're the contemporary music business, developed as a product business. They were going to sell you music on some sort of physical material, and they were also going to sell you the devices to listen to that. And everything, again, from vinyl to CDs to cassettes to 8 tracks. This is music as a product. But to bookend the music as a product era, which in the grand scheme of things now sort of looks like a blip in music history, a very important blip. Before there was recording, music was a service in the sense that if you wanted to hear music, somebody had to be in the room performing it for you, or you had to be performing it yourself because there was no such thing as a recording. And then by the time we get to the current era, music is a service again in the sense that you pay for a Spotify subscription or a Tidal subscription or an Apple subscription every month. You do not own that music. It is not contained in any physical object. It exists out there on the cloud. You are paying for access to that music. And I just think there are analogs to how music functioned in the 1800s and how music functions now, and that it's a service-based industry, which really contrasts with what the music industry was built around for almost a century.
Hmm. Yeah, really fascinating to look at it like that. Another and I'm kind of jumping around, but another major turning
Sure.
point that you write about in your book is SoundScan that came about in 1991. Um, yeah, and it's basically, I guess, an accounting method to track, what record sales were like at record stores. I didn't know that before then they just kind of called up and asked them what was selling. So that was fascinating to me. But yeah, if you wanted to talk a little bit about SoundScan and how that impacted the type of music and songs we were seeing on the charts.
Yeah, so the way the charts work today, and they've worked since 1991, is through this method. We call this the sound scan era. Basically, in the early 90s, Billboard was working with Nielsen, and they flipped a switch so that if you went into a music store, you bought a CD, as soon as the clerk scanned it, that data was going to be sent to Billboard. So you got a very accurate picture about what people were actually purchasing. And the data today is still very accurate in the sense that when you open up Amazon Music and click play on a song, Billboard is going to get a direct feed of that data. So we're pretty sure we know what people are actually listening to. But before 1991, November 1991, Billboard's system was less precise. And basically, what they did was they just called up record stores and surveyed them, which is a perfectly reasonable way to try to figure out what is popular. But it is certainly more, uh, it's easier for there to be mistakes in a method like that on both sides. Maybe Billboard there's a biased sample of record stores you're calling. It's not in another way to say that it's not representative of what people are actually buying. Maybe the record clerk is misremembering what actually sold and is telling you the wrong thing. So overnight in 1991, the Billboard charts changed dramatically because we got a more accurate representation of what people were actually buying. And what you see is that suddenly, again, I've already said overnight, but it really was, there's dramatically more hip hop on the charts, there's dramatically more alternative rock on the charts, and there's dramatically more country on the charts. So it seems like some of the charts before that moment were a bit of an illusion. It was the music industry pushing certain things, Billboard only calling certain record shops and not getting a perfect snapshot of what people were actually listening to. So we get more accurate data overnight, and from that, the charts become a more accurate reflection of what people's tastes actually were, and that exists in various ways still to this day.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm really interested by like how long songs stay at number one, and you talk about this some in the book. You know, I think in general, there were more songs to top the charts like back in the day and in the 60s, and you talk about in the 70s how there was payola, and I mean there was payola in the 60s too, but some kind of shady stuff going on with getting more songs to chart. But yeah, just if you want to talk kind of generally about the why, chart songs are staying longer at number one. I know it kind of goes up and down throughout the years, but kind of your trends you saw there.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it's one of those stats that sounds really boring, like how
Yeah.
many weeks is something
Yeah.
at the top of the charts. But often the changes in that average reflect other things going on in the music business. For example, in chapter 5 of the book, as you mentioned, I talk about payola or the charts being manipulated by people in the radio or people at Billboard. And because of that, we see much higher turnover at the top of the charts because theoretically, if you're doing favors to give people number one hits, you're going to want the chart to turn over more quickly. Once we get to the SoundScan era, we see that songs stay at the top of the charts for much longer. Whereas, say, in the 70s, in a random year in 1970, you might have, I don't know, 20 number one hits. There are some years in the early 1990s after they switched to SoundScan where you see like nine number one hits, 10, 11 number one hits. And part of that was SoundScan was showing us that our tastes are much stickier than what the previous survey method suggested. And then as time goes on, Billboard continues to change the rules, and the chart really changes dramatically. Now we're getting a feed of what people are actually listening to, whereas in the 90s and before, it was a feed of what people were purchasing, which it's still called the Billboard Hot 100, but it's really different in how it functions. The equivalent would be if in 1965 you didn't know how many people purchased a Beatles record, you knew how many times once they got home they actually spun that record and listened to it. And because of that, we have seen huge ebbs and flows over the last decade in how long songs stay at number one. Over the last couple of years, the charts have been super, super sticky, and that's mostly a function of streaming and how listening behavior functions in the streaming era. But yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it's one, like I said, it's one of those things. It seems like sort of a simple stat, but it really reflects seismic changes in how Billboard works, but also how things in popular music work.
Yeah. That's an interesting point. It makes me think of like, whenever Taylor Swift puts out an album, it's like that the Billboard chart for that week, like she'll have like basically all her songs from the album will be on the chart. And that's, so different from but it's like if the Beatles, if we had the technology back when Sergeant Pepper's came out, all the songs would be on the chart too. But,
Of
for a long
course,
time it had to be well also didn't Billboard only for a long time only consider like commercially
singles.
released singles, yeah, to make it. Yeah.
Yeah, this was something that it really came to a head in the 90s, but if a song was an album cut, it could not chart because how would they know if people were purchasing it? Like if something was not released as a single in 1965, you could not purchase that specifically. You could purchase an album to hear it. But by the time you get to the 90s, the savvy record executives realized that they could service a single to radio, it would get very popular. Then, without actually releasing it as a standalone single that people could buy, they would just leave it to the album, and margins on albums were much higher. So you would have a situation where people had to buy this very expensive thing for that had 10 tracks when they were really only going after one track. And that led to the huge profits that the industry saw at the end of the 1990s. Eventually, Billboard made a switch that said you could chart if something was not released as a single. And before they made this change, there were many songs in the 90s that were huge but did not chart at number one. One that comes to mind is the Goo Goo Dolls song Iris.
Hmm.
Huge radio hit. Wasn't commercially released as a single, so it by Billboard's rules at the time it couldn't chart. But had they changed those rules earlier where album only tracks could chart, it probably would have been a number one hit.
Yeah. I guess that probably was number one on like adult contemporary chart or on
Yeah,
Airplay or something.
yeah, I think if you look at the airplay chart, it's like
Yeah.
number one for half the year or something
Yeah.
silly whenever it came out.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, yeah, don't want to get too in the weeds on all the numbers and data, even though that is interesting to me. Let's talk a little about the songs. I thought it was really cool that you highlighted the song "Want Ads" by Honeycombs, which really is a lost classic. Yeah, I didn't even realize I knew the song, but I didn't realize that went to number one. And yeah, and kind of timely in that there's a new box set out on so that was one of Holland Dozier Holland's labels, right?
Yeah,
Uh
Hot Wax.
Hot Wax, yeah. And there's a they've been putting out box sets of like all their so they did all these labels after Motown and actually gifted Chris Bishop the recently the one of the box sets he lives in Detroit and I've been meaning to dig into that because a lot of that stuff I haven't heard and I'm sure it's great because it's um it's Holland Dozier Holland so uh but anyway I guess yeah one ads if you want to talk about what you love about that song.
Oh yeah, so the one I thought was a sort of fun thing throughout the book is the chapters are structured in a way where I spend the bulk of the chapter just talking about the trends and sounds that were popular in a certain era and specific things that I noticed. But I close every chapter with like, these are the best songs, these are the worst songs. You know, these are some other songs I think were are that are worth highlighting, and I'll leave it to the book to talk about how those were chosen. But I do highlight want ads at the end of one chapter because I think it is so criminally underrated. I mean, this song absolutely rips. It's groovy. Honestly, the lyrics are sort of funny, or there's humor baked into the lyrics. It's a great vocal. It's it's a perfect to me at least, to my ears, it's like a perfect pop song, and it has left almost no cultural imprint to the point where it's not really sampled other than the fact that the Avalanches, they sampled it on an album in the early 2000s. That's probably the most prominent sample of the song ever. And as you know, music from the early 70s is sampled all the time, especially music in the vein of want ads. At the same time, it's like you don't really hear it in movies. It's not really streamed that many times, and it's always left me scratching my head why, because it is so good. I mean, they were not a true one-hit wonder. I think they had another hit on the charts, but I guess I can understand why it's not listened to as much, but it should be, and I'm glad we're talking about it. And I continue to talk about it as I talk to people about this book because I'm like, if there's one number one hit you should listen to that you have not heard before, I think it should be this one because it is was forgotten unfairly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, on that topic, what were some other, I guess, song number one hits that you either discovered or you just grew to appreciate more from working on this book? Like some of your highlights, your favorites.
Yeah, as I got closer to the present, obviously I was more and more familiar with most of the songs. I was born in 95, so I had a pretty good education on pop and rock music from before my birth, but there were still songs that I had not come across before. Some of them were, I think, obscure. There's, and one of the first number one hits is a song called "Come Softly to Me" by a group called the Fleetwoods, which is like a vocal trio from the late 1950s, early 1960s. And this song barely rises above a whisper, but it's an absolutely beautiful song. I was so happy to come across not just this song, but the group. I think they're underrated. And, I mean, that's older music. So, of course, it's not going to get as much play no matter what. But I think it should really be a classic from that era. What else comes to mind? There's some that I was sort of familiar with, but I became more infatuated with. I developed a real soft spot for Phil Collins Against All Odds.
Hmm.
Also, sort of the same era, Gloria Estefan and Miami Sound Machine have a song called Anything for You that's just a really gentle, beautiful melody. And I also developed a taste for a lot of disco songs, which I was not expecting. Disco at its best has some unbelievable music, and I don't think this song is obscure, but like Thelma Houston's "Don't Leave Me This Way" always comes to mind when I think of songs that I was not too familiar with before I started this journey, but really came to enjoy and still go back to time and time again. And I guess to give you one contemporary-ish, well, I say contemporary, it's 20 years old. So Sick by Neo, sort of a nice, soulful song from the early 2000s, and got great lyrics, nice vocal from Neo. There were unexpected treats in every era, which I try to convey in the book that there's good and bad stuff
Yeah.
always being made.
Oh, absolutely. I appreciate that you made that point because all errors have their great and awful, in my opinion, and you just got to know what to look for. But
Totally.
your book definitely yeah highlights the ones to check out. Yeah, but that's interesting. You brought up disco. I was just thinking, I know you talked about Donna Summer some. Was Hot Stuff and Bad Girls, were they both number one on Hot 100?
They were both number ones. I
Yeah,
was I was familiar with those because my mom really
yeah,
likes Donna Summer.
yeah,
But those are great songs. Some
yeah,
great, unexpectedly good guitar work on those songs.
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and you mentioned yeah, Neo. I was going through the number ones from like the last 25 years recently, and really not a whole lot of R&B songs to go to number one on the Hot 100. So it's always interesting when you have the so-called like crossover hits. Like I know I watched that Luther Vandross documentary, and he
Oh
so
yeah.
wanted to top the Hot 100. Like I think he finally did, uh, maybe once or twice. But yeah, yeah, just I guess maybe some of your favorites in terms of like so-called crossover hits, or like it could be country, R&B, anything that you like as a number one hit. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about that question as deeply. It's interesting because R&B had a ton of crossover in the 1990s with
Mhm.
Boys to Men, a lot of those slower Mariah Carey ballads.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is an apt observation that I feel like by the 2000s, you see more hip hop at the top of the charts
Yeah.
than you see
Uh,
R&B. One of the weirdest crossovers is the Harlem Shake, which was a function of Billboard started counting YouTube views toward the charts. And because of that, the Harlem Shake was like a super popular trend on YouTube. But r- I actually talked about this on another podcast. It's not like I'm going back and listening to the Harlem Shake basically ever,
yeah.
but it is a truly weird, weird electronic song that, by the grace of God and the strangeness of YouTube trends, managed to get to the top of the Hot 100. And I love when stuff like that happens, even if it's not a song that I'm particularly infatuated with. Uh, there's some good country crossovers. Country is like it ebbs and flows in popularity. In the early 70s, early to mid 70s, there's some country crossovers that I like. Thank God I'm a Country Boy by John Denver. I love that two-step and rhythm. Over the last couple years, country's come back again. I don't love a ton of it, but I like Zach Bryan. He had a song with Casey Musgraves, "I Remember Everything," that It's a true country folk crossover to make it to the top of the charts. So yeah, those are a couple that come to mind. But
Yeah,
if something else strikes me while we're talking, I'll bring it
yeah,
up.
yeah, cool. Um, Another interesting point you make in the book is like how technology, you know, well, technology and also like the physical product, you know, changes how artists write songs, and whether it be the song length or the song structure, and of course, with streaming, you're having more songs that they get to the hook faster. Of course, that's been a trend in pop music for a long time. But yeah,
Totally.
what one of the things you write about, which is really interesting, is how it's like yeah the streaming has led to shorter songs, but it's led to longer albums, so more songs on the album. What if you could
Yeah.
talk a little about what you found there?
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest trends that I talk about throughout the book, or one of the key threads, is that musical evolution is often downstream from technological evolution, which David Byrne writes about this really beautifully in his book, How Music Works. He makes the point that saying that doesn't sound that insightful, but it really is, because there's this idea that creativity is just like this upwelling of emotion that has nothing to do with the technology you're working with or the way your music is distributed. But it really does come the other way. People make music to fit certain formats. And in terms of song length, in the streaming era, if a song is streamed for more than 30 seconds, you generate a royalty or you generate revenue. And it seems like because of that, artists have shortened songs and they have sort of put the meat of the song right at the beginning. You don't see these long, winding Stairway to Heaven like intros. Also, if a song is shorter, it can be played more times, and the way royalties work, it's a volume game. So if I have one 45-minute song, you can only listen to that once an hour, where if I have a 2-minute song, you could play that 30 times an hour. Theoretically, you could generate more streams. But that brings us to the paradox of songs have gotten shorter, but especially in the pop world, albums have gotten longer. If you look at recent records by Drake, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Morgan Wallen, there'll be like these 30-song double albums. And, I always say to people that there's only like three double albums in history that I think are worth truly the price of admission through the whole thing. But the idea is, even if I'm not a big Drake fan, I'll probably click play through the album once. If there are more songs, he will generate more revenue than if he just put out a 9 or 10 track album. So you really see that among superstars. One of the outliers is Lorde. She continues to put out like 8 or 10 track albums, which is interesting. But it's a good example of how technology shapes the things that artists do, even if they're not completely aware of it.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And that point you just made about it being these big double albums that Morgan Wallen and Drake and all of them are doing, but I didn't think about this before. But obviously, vinyl has had a big resurgence. I collect
Yeah.
vinyl as well as CD, and yeah, it's like they're really capitalizing in two ways, in the streaming and that they're if they're pressing their album to vinyl, I imagine they're getting more, if
Oh
it's a
yeah.
double album because you're able to charge a lot more for a double album.
Yeah, I mean
The margin, yeah.
the margins on new vinyl, like I almost only buy used vinyl.
Yeah.
The new vinyl, I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You could spend 40, $50.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Really gotten out of hand. Um, yes, I guess you got about 5 minutes here. Yeah, so you wrote right in the book towards the end that you know, you've had appreciation for pop music, it sounds like for quite some time, but being this thorough, listening to all the number ones and doing all this research, like how did it in general kind of change your view of pop, or do you feel like you have more appreciation or admiration for pop stars after
Yeah,
doing this? Yeah.
I think I, growing up, I was super into like classic rock and was of the opinion like this is authentic music, and the singer-songwriter bearing their soul by themselves is more real than the pop star who has the dance routine and the elaborate stage show. Listening to all these songs definitely opened up my mind that it's actually not the case that like it's more authentic or it's better if you're singing, playing a guitar by yourself. As much as I love music, I still love music like that. Um, Additionally, I came around to the idea that it's okay if we're talking about commercial music that some people are trying to make music to reach a lot of ears. That doesn't negate or make that because someone's trying to reach a lot of people doesn't necessarily mean that the music is bad. It also doesn't mean the music is good, but you should take it for what it's worth. What does the music actually sound like? And some people who can make music that connects with a lot of people I have tremendous respect for. Sometimes it comes across as completely inauthentic, and I'm not as into that. But the people who do it well, Motown always comes to mind. They were trying to make records, they were trying to sell records, and they did it in a way that seemed very authentic, was very vibrant. But more generally, my mind just has become open to more music in general. Because I realized that things that I didn't like, maybe I wasn't hearing them in the right way. Like if you're going to listen to house music or some dancey electronic genre and you're only going to listen to it sitting in your bedroom by yourself, well, the music wasn't made, that was not the ideal environment for it to be heard. And you see that throughout pop music history is that if you don't get something or it doesn't connect with you, try listening to it in a different place or in a different way, and maybe it'll make more sense. So I just try to keep a more open mind. There are certainly things I like and I don't like, but I think I'm more open to different styles and genres, and I do respect people who can make things that have mass appeal, but still do it with craft.
Yeah. Well, yeah, speaking of doing it with craft, I did want to get in a question about Max Martin because it's
Mhm.
just amazing like how successful I think as a producer he probably has more number ones than anyone of all time maybe, but just like briefly, I guess what is your takeaway of what is it that he's doing that what's the form I guess if you know the formula you do, but like what do you think are some of the things you've seen from his hits that he does well? Like,
Yeah, I do joke that if I
yeah,
if I
yeah,
knew what he was doing, I would just
yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Um, he's a really fascinating figure, and he has some songs that I love, some that I really do not like. He certainly writes to a formula in the sense that he's always going to write songs with huge choruses or with short, punchy melodies. And like I said, if you're going to criticize, if you're not going to like that, like you also have to be critical of what Motown was doing in the 60s because they were also writing, in a sense, to a formula. I think Max Martin's been able to do it so long because he is willing to accept the fact that he doesn't always know what's going on. He plays to his strengths in the sense that all right, maybe trap music is more popular now. He's still going to write strong melodies, but he'll let some other producer come in, and put trap beats all over the songs. Or he's working with Ariana Grande, like he can't write lyrics that 15-year-old girls are going to connect with. So he lets whoever the artist is handle the lyrics. So I think he's really good at playing to his strengths, and he's really good at sort of being a chameleon where he'll work in a different style just because it's popular, whereas some other people would be like, no, I'm not doing that because I make punk music or what have you.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. This has been fascinating. And everyone, make sure you pick it up. It's called Uncharted Territory, available wherever books are sold. It's on Bloomsbury. They've been doing a lot of great music books, so it's great that you got them to publish it. But yeah, yeah, make sure you stay tuned to 360degreesound.com where we continue to bring you music from all angles. Thanks again, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, take care.